everybody says break it up, right? The Biafran agitator will say break it up. My more considered Yoruba Ronu brethren, the Odua Republicans, will say let's have our Odua Republic. They believe that in doing this, the Nigerian state, once destroyed, would provide the solution to the many problems that Nigeria presents. So in this ethnic utopia that we would have successfully built by breaking up Nigeria, which is the enemy, we would then have all these problems disappeared, proving the thesis that Nigeria is the enemy.
Hello, my great and wonderful people. We welcome you once again to our today's episode of this program. And today we get this video for our table when we will receive from Barrister Dele Farotimi and also a human rights activist. This one, the recent video interview when we say in grants. Also, they educate Nigerians concerning the issues when EBC they undertook for this country, when EBC they make the Yoruba people they demand their own liberty, and also the Biafra people. We always they talk this way. Anytime when we see Barrister Dele Farotimi for screen, may we pay attention to them, because this man not just they carry they come outside for scream just because of say he want talk. No, he get crucial information when EBC you yourself will need and me myself go need. Something when EBC you never expect or believe it dey behind this movement of Biafra and also the Ododuwa Republic. You listen to this video first, we'll come back for more.
Nothing ever seems to work in these spaces, and then you start asking yourself, is it not working because people are failing to make it work, or because they are succeeding at what they had set out to do originally? Because surely, if nobody seemed capable of making it work, it could very well be that it was designed not to work. At what point do we really begin to consider the possibility that maybe what is happening is what was purposed to happen? So when you consider the lot of the Nigerian, the objective reality of the Nigerian, it becomes plausible to begin to ask the question, is the state itself the enemy? So this morning, what I want us to talk about is Nigeria when the state is the enemy. But to have a full understanding or appreciation for the argument I'm looking to raise today, I think it is apposite that we first of all look to what is the state, what is the purpose of the state. So if you say when the state is the enemy, which is what I'm saying in that poetic, jargonic sounding manner, is Nigeria is the enemy. Nigeria is the enemy for my not having energy. Nigeria is the reason why, because everybody says break it up, right? The Biafran agitator will say break it up. My more considered Yoruba Ronu brethren, the Odua Republicans, will say let's have our Odua Republic. They believe that in doing this, the Nigerian state, once destroyed, would provide the solution to the many problems that Nigeria presents. So in this ethnic utopia that we would have successfully built by breaking up Nigeria, which is the enemy, we would then have all these problems disappeared, proving the thesis that Nigeria is the enemy. But let's first of all consider this. What is the purpose of the state? If you take it generically, there are various socio-political constructs and theories for the evolution of the state. So generally, it is argued that states emerged because men found the need to come together in more organized society in order to have the preservation of lives and properties. So the first purpose of the state, of the modern state, is the preservation of lives and properties. But when you look at these and then you now ask yourself, in that most basic of the task of the state and its purpose, the Nigerian state has failed the victims completely. Oh, sorry, I should say the citizens. The Nigerian state has failed the citizens completely because in that most basic of duties, the primary duty of the state, the Nigerian state has failed, and it has failed woefully. Why would I say this? If you look to the relationship of those named citizens in Nigeria and the state, which is responsible for the governance of the Nigerian space, which principally means that it is responsible for the security of the lives and properties of those who live within that Nigerian state, you then find very quickly that it is next to impossible to pretend that the Nigerian state has provided any sort of protection to the victims of the Nigerian state. So, what is the purpose of the Nigerian state? I think to understand the purpose of the Nigerian state, we must go to its origins, because it is only in its origins that we might begin to make sense of the Nigerian state. The Nigerian state began its life as the possession of buccaneers, the Royal, I think it's got the Royal Niger Company, I believe it was called, a British trading concern that traded everything from human beings to spices, anything that would bring money, it traded. And after a point, by royal charter, the British Crown took over the Royal Niger Company. And then it had the colony of Lagos and the protectorate of northern Nigeria and the protectorate of southern Nigeria. Some people would argue that those two were unfortunately amalgamated in 1914 or thereabout. Can't remember now. But for those of you who are interested, you may go ahead and read your history. But suffice to say that Nigeria existed solely for British interest, British economic interest. It wasn't benign. There was nothing benign about either slavery or colonialism. Suffice to say that the Nigerian state is the offspring of the British interest that was Nigeria. The Nigerian state as it is emerged in 1960, and as it began its trajectories in 1966. But what you have today is a country that does not work for those it pretends to serve. It's a country that is devoid of citizens, and in place of citizens have victims. So yes, there is a Nigerian state because it has territories. But no, the Nigerian state does not have citizens. And the reason for the absence of citizenship in the Nigerian state is not far-fetched. It is because as states advance, both in Europe and in America and in other parts of the world, what happened was that the state of men evolved from serfdom, which was what obtained in kingdoms and in imperial dynasties. And these serfs and commoners eventually became citizens. And by a concept called the rule of law, all these became equal under the law, within reason, and within the boundaries, of course, of class struggles. But the problem with the Nigerian space is that it has not evolved to the point where the law rules. And because the law does not rule in Nigeria, what has simply happened is that those who should be citizens have become victims because the law does not rule, and the people occupying the Nigerian space are not equal under the law. Some are more equal than the other. So the purpose of the Nigerian state as it is today is not for the promotion of the interest and benefit of all Nigerians. It is for the preservation of the interest of those who have claimed rights in the Nigeria. So you've got the British licensees of Nigeria, and then you've got the local imperators who disguise themselves as politicians and democrats. So today in Nigeria, the purpose of the state is not to serve the citizens because it has no citizens. It is simply to entrench the interest and protect the interest of those who pretend to rule Nigeria. Now, a lot of people would argue this, but remember that my key thesis is to show you that the Nigerian state itself is the enemy. This is not to say that I subscribe to the advocacy of the separatists, but I believe that even for those of us who wishes to preserve this geographical space known as Nigeria, we must understand the nature of the struggle that we have in front of us. What are the design intentions? If you have a system of governance unyoked to law that has now created 37 states, because that is the net effect of the enthronement of Mr. Bola Ahmed Tinubu, Abuja is more or less your 37th state. How they'll deal with that incongruity later on is entirely up to them. But key these in. You have 37 centers of power at the state level. Each one of these 37 centers have multiple local government units beneath them. Altogether, you've got 774 of those. And then you've got the behemoth known as the federal government of Nigeria, which takes in every benefit and then dispenses based on more or less a sultan emir arrangement up and down the length and breadth of the country. In the midst of all of these, the interest of those who occupy these power sharing centers, which are more or less money dispensing centers, matters by far more, and it is the entire raison d'etre of the state. The police, the army, every law enforcement agency, in the absence of the rule of law, have been repurposed to preserve these persons in power. And they would even occasionally do battles in the services of these persons. So you can think back to the Yaya Bello EFCC drama, where policemen protected Yaya Bello from the EFCC. You get it? Yeah. So in the absence of laws, these have dissolved into private armies that sometimes work at opposite ends of each other. So, when you now begin to look at the choices being made by these multiple money dispensing units, you find very quickly that they work in tandem to ensure that the people are kept ignorant. Because it is in the liberation of the people's minds that questions will be asked of their enslavers. So the first thing about which almost all the ruiners of Nigeria are agreed is the need to keep the people stupid. By a combination of deliberately weaponized ignorance, which means that the state deliberately ignores to train the minds of those it calls citizens, or it deliberately miseducates them, indoctrinates them, so that they might embrace hatred in place of reason, with the active participant of the religious class who have become glove-in-hand partners of those who are ruining the country and whilst pretending to rule it. What you then find is that the seat of creativity in man, his imagination, is held captive and bound by ignorance, deliberate miseducation, and religion. Now, if a man believes that his problems will be solved not by his physical exertion, but by praying to an invincible God to do for him what he has been blessed by the same God and equipped to do for himself, it becomes easier to keep such a person in poverty. So he prays his way into poverty whilst giving to the pastor and the imam to enter into prosperity. He refuses and he abdicates the use of his brains so that he might be dictated to by others in the name of God. So you weaponize ignorance using religion as fuel, and then you weaponize poverty, because a man who is ignorant and incapable of using his imagination is already doomed to poverty. And this is what has been done to the Nigerian. So when you look at these weapons that have been fashioned against the Nigerian, it becomes instructive that you must ask yourself, is it beyond the capacity of the state to ensure that the Nigerian is properly indoctrinated to do good, is properly trained, and has a functional brain? Is it beyond the capacity of the state? I say no, that is not the case. It is a deliberate choice of the state to keep the Nigerian like that. And I don't need to travel far to buttress my point. In my youth, it was possible to go through the public educational system and acquire good education, by far better than what we're paying shiploads of money to get, not only in Nigeria, but outside of Nigeria. It used to be in my youth, when I was going to Aberdeen Primary School in UI, that we had white students, European students, American students who came to University of Ibadan to earn credits for their universities abroad. I saw this in the University of Ife in the 80s as well. So how come our universities have now become places that are more or less graduating barely literate people? It is because these are the design choices of the Nigerian state. It is deliberate. The state simply stopped investing in education because it realized that an educated mind is not susceptible to slavery or serfdom, which is all the Nigerian state has in place for the victims of the Nigerian state. The Nigerian state has equally weaponized poverty against these people. And the weaponization of poverty began with the weaponization of ignorance, because an ignorant person is already predestined for poverty. As a man thinketh in his heart, so he is. If a man has no capacity to think beyond the physical, and he does not believe in anything other than the supernatural, to whom he is constantly praying when he should be working, it shouldn't be a surprise if such a person is found in poverty. That is just the objective reality of his existence. You know, in recent times, as they started this band A, band B, and band zero argument about electricity pricing, I had no choice but to begin to take a different look at the totality of our governance problems. Nigeria is going to be 64 years old pretty soon. And these have been 64 years during which we have found that it is beyond our capacity to generate electricity in Nigeria. I grew up shouting up NEPA. I'm thankful that my children are so privileged that they don't understand the meaning of up NEPA, but they do understand that a lot of money goes to buying diesel or inverter. And then I asked myself the inevitable question. Is it that the rulers of Nigeria have been so grossly incompetent that electricity generation is beyond their capacity? Is that the case? That successive governments of Nigeria, from during the first coming of Obasanjo to the Shagari years up until today, it's been impossible for us as a people to master the art of generating electricity. In spite of billions of dollars spent, we don't appear to have increased our electricity generating capacity throughout my entire lifetime. This has been a struggle in place all my life. Generating electricity is beyond the capacity of the Nigerian state and people. All the monies we've spent have made no difference. A country blessed with humongous human resource capacity is incapable of generating electricity. Public water works have become rarities in this country in the 22nd century. We can't even have public water works. I live in the Lekki Peninsula. There is no public water works anywhere in Lekki. Even Lekki Phase 1, where they have rudimentary ones, I'm not sure if it still works. Yet, when I was growing up in Ibadan, we used to have public taps at Inolinde. I'm sure they don't have any such thing again these days. So, across the length and breadth of the country, in spite of humongous amounts being owed by state governments and the federal government based on loans taken for the provision of water services in urban and rural centers, we simply don't have public water works. The entirety of our road networks have more or less collapsed. Don't worry, they are paving the one to Calabar with gold. That's why it's so expensive. And don't worry, it's not a land grab. Tinubu and Chagori are not looking to expand the Equatorial Atlantic. The people whose ancestors used to live on the coast aren't about to. In fact, they haven't just lost their coastal coast locations. Cultural genocide hasn't just been committed on the altar of somebody's greed. Let's pretend all this are the case. So I'm asking myself, for how long are we going to keep saying they failed because they are incompetent? At what point are we going to have to admit to ourselves that what we are seeing are deliberate policy choices, that the state itself is the enemy? I am of the opinion that at some point, you actually have to start believing the evidence of your eyes. You have to admit to the fact that what you are seeing is what it is. It cannot possibly be that it is beyond the capacity of the Nigerian to generate electricity. It cannot be beyond our capacity to design an educational system that is fit for purpose. It cannot be beyond our capacity to have functional infrastructure. It cannot be beyond our capacity to have a system that works for all. It simply cannot be that we are incapable of doing the right thing, except perhaps maybe the state itself is truly the enemy. Maybe things are the way they are because this is the way the state desires that it be. At some point, we're going to have to consider, is the Nigerian state the enemy? Or is the Nigerian state a facilitator of good things? These are questions that must necessarily be asked. I have come to the conclusion that the Nigerian state is the enemy because its design intention and choices have not been made with the people's welfare as the overarching interest or the reason that has governed these choices. As far-fetched as it might seem, it is my argument that the Nigerian state is the enemy.